"If you have $5, I'll quit right now," the manager said loud enough for the entire store to hear. And the laughter came instantly, rippling across the polished floors like something rehearsed, like everyone had been waiting for permission to turn a man into a joke. Marcus Reed didn't move at first, standing just inside the sliding glass doors as a gust of cold November air slipped in behind him, carrying the faint smell of rain and distant traffic, his coat worn thin at the elbows, his shoes scuffed from miles of sidewalks. Yet his posture remained steady, shoulders relaxed, eyes calm, as if the noise around him belonged to a different world. The store was bright, rows of white lights reflecting off chrome shelves and spotless tile, a place designed to look effortless and expensive. And Marcus stood there quietly holding the handle of the door for a young mother pushing a stroller, stepping aside so she could pass. Offering a small nod she barely noticed before she hurried forward, her attention already swallowed by shopping lists and glowing sale signs. Daniel Whitmore leaned against the counter with his arms folded, a crisp white shirt tucked neatly into tailored slacks, his name tag catching the light as he smirked, enjoying the moment as customers slowed their carts, curious, sensing something entertaining unfolding, phone subtly lifting, eyes flickering with anticipation. "You heard me," Daniel repeated, louder this time, his voice polished with casual arrogance. "If you've got $5, I'll take it. Walk out that door and never come back." Someone near the register chuckled, then another, and soon the sound layered into something thicker, something heavier, a quiet crowd forming without anyone admitting they had stopped to watch. Marcus lowered his hand from the door and stepped forward slowly, not rushed, not defensive, just measured, the faint squeak of his shoe against the tile barely audible beneath the hum of overhead lights and distant checkout scanners. And as he walked, he bent slightly to pick up a receipt that had slipped from a nearby counter, placing it gently back where it belonged, a small gesture no one noticed, because attention had already locked onto the unfolding spectacle. Daniel tilted his head, studying him like a curiosity, like something out of place, while a teenage employee nearby exchanged glances with a coworker, half amused, half uncomfortable, but neither said a word. Marcus stopped a few feet from the counter, his hands relaxed at his sides, his expression unchanged, and for a brief second, something shifted in the air, a stillness that passed quickly as someone in the back snorted and the laughter picked up again, louder this time, encouraged by Daniel's confident grin. Outside, a gray sky pressed low against the glass windows, and the soft rumble of traffic drifted through the entrance each time the doors slid open, cold air brushing across the floor. But inside, the warmth of artificial lighting made the moment feel suspended, like time had slowed just enough for everyone to lean in. Daniel tapped the counter twice with his fingers, impatient, amused, confident that the moment belonged entirely to him, while Marcus simply looked at him, not with anger, not with embarrassment, but with a quiet steadiness that didn't match the laughter filling the room. And for a fraction of a second, Daniel's smile faltered, barely noticeable, before he leaned forward again, ready to enjoy the punchline he believed was already written. Marcus Reed reached slowly into the inside pocket of his worn coat, not hurried, not defensive, just deliberate, and the small movement alone drew more attention than any argument could have, because the laughter began to soften into murmurs as customers leaned slightly forward, curious about what he might pull out, while the overhead lights hummed faintly and the distant beep of a checkout scanner echoed across the store like a reminder that life outside this moment was still moving. His fingers brushed against folded paper, then loose coins, and he carefully brought his hand out, revealing a few quarters resting in his palm, their edges dulled from years of use, their metallic surface catching the bright store lights as he turned his hand slightly, counting them with quiet precision. A teenage employee near the candy aisle shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Marcus and then at Daniel, sensing something about the moment that no longer felt entirely humorous. But the silence did not last long as someone near the back chuckled again, whispering something to a friend, and the sound reignited the crowd's amusement. Marcus stepped closer to the counter, the faint sound of his shoes brushing against tile almost drowned by the soft whir of automatic doors opening behind him, letting in another wave of cool air that curled across the floor. Daniel watched with a smirk that suggested certainty, like a man already convinced of how the scene would end, his fingers tapping lightly against the countertop while he tilted his head, waiting for the moment to collapse into something ridiculous. Marcus placed the coins gently onto the polished surface, not sliding them, not dropping them, but setting them down one by one. The soft metallic clicks sounding louder than expected in the quiet that followed, and he counted them slowly, his voice calm, almost reflective, as though he were speaking to himself rather than the room. 1 quarter, 2 quarters, 3, and then a few nickels, each one lined carefully, forming a small, uneven stack beneath the fluorescent glow. A woman holding a shopping basket lowered it slightly, her expression shifting from amusement to something quieter, something uncertain, while the young mother Marcus had helped earlier paused near the aisle, watching with furrowed brows. Daniel leaned forward, eyebrows raised, his smile widening as he glanced at the small collection of coins, clearly far from the amount he had demanded, and he let out a soft laugh that carried across the counter. "That is not even close," he said casually, shaking his head, his voice filled with practiced confidence, while a few customers nodded in agreement, their earlier laughter returning in scattered bursts. Marcus looked down at the coins for a moment, then lifted his eyes again, his expression still steady, still calm, as if the reaction around him did not define the moment. The store lights reflected faintly in his eyes, and for a brief second, the room felt suspended again, the laughter thinning into uncertain smiles, while somewhere near the entrance, the wind pressed softly against the glass doors, rattling them just enough to create a quiet vibration. Marcus adjusted the coins slightly, aligning them with careful attention, and although the amount was small, the way he handled them carried a sense of dignity that contrasted sharply with the casual amusement around him. And as he rested his hand beside the stack, the silence grew heavier, not complete, but noticeable, as though something unseen had begun shifting beneath the surface. Daniel Whitmore let out a slow breath through his nose, the kind that signaled impatience wrapped in confidence, and he straightened slightly behind the counter, adjusting the cuff of his crisp sleeve as though the entire moment were simply a minor inconvenience unfolding beneath his authority, while the small stack of coins sat between them under the fluorescent lights, their dull metallic surface reflecting faint streaks of white across the polished countertop. He glanced at the coins again, then back at Marcus, his expression calm but edged with amusement, like a man watching a predictable scene play out exactly as expected. "You know," Daniel said, his voice measured but loud enough for the nearby customers to hear, "most people come in here to buy something, not to perform a demonstration," and a few scattered chuckles returned, softer now, but still present, encouraged by his tone. Marcus remained still, his hands resting lightly at the counter, his fingers relaxed, his posture steady, as though he were listening to something deeper than the words themselves. Behind him, a couple pushing a cart slowed to a stop, pretending to compare items on a shelf while their attention remained fixed on the interaction. The young cashier, Emily Carter, shifted her weight slightly behind the register, her eyes flicking between Daniel and Marcus, her expression tightening as the atmosphere changed from playful to uneasy. Daniel leaned forward, tapping the counter gently with his fingertip near the coins, the soft tapping sound punctuating the silence that had begun to settle across the store. $5, he repeated, raising one eyebrow, and that is not even halfway there. Someone near the beverage cooler let out a quiet laugh, but it faded quickly, as if even they were unsure whether the moment still deserved humor. Marcus glanced down at the coins again, then slowly reached back into his coat pocket, his movement calm and unhurried. And this time the store grew noticeably quieter, the hum of refrigeration units and distant checkout scanners becoming more pronounced as attention tightened around him. He pulled out a folded bill, worn at the edges, and carefully smoothed it between his fingers before placing it beside the coins, the faint rustle of paper sounding almost deliberate in the silence. Emily's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the bill, and the young mother nearby tilted her head, watching closely. Daniel's smirk softened, just slightly, as he glanced down at the growing total, then quickly recovered, leaning back with a small shrug, his confidence returning as he crossed his arms. "Still short," he said, though his voice lacked the earlier ease, and he shifted his weight subtly, as if adjusting to a moment that no longer felt entirely under his control. Marcus did not respond, instead aligning the bill carefully beside the coins, his movements precise, respectful, as though each dollar carried weight beyond its value. Outside, a gray cloud moved slowly across the sky, dimming the light that filtered through the front windows, and the store seemed to grow quieter, the earlier laughter replaced by the subtle tension of people waiting for something they could not yet define. Daniel cleared his throat lightly, glancing around as he noticed more customers watching. Their carts paused, their expressions uncertain, and for the first time, the room no longer felt like an audience to a joke, but like witnesses to something unfolding that no one had expected. Marcus Reed kept his hand resting beside the coins and the worn bill, his fingers still, his posture calm, while the quiet inside the store stretched longer than anyone expected, the kind of silence that made the hum of ceiling lights and the faint rattle of shopping carts feel unusually loud. And Daniel Whitmore shifted slightly behind the counter, his earlier confidence beginning to thin as he glanced around at the customers who had stopped pretending to shop and were now openly watching. Emily Carter lowered her scanner slowly, her eyes fixed on the small stack of money, while a man in a business suit near the entrance crossed his arms, his attention fully drawn to the unfolding moment. Marcus reached into his coat pocket again, his movements slow and deliberate, and the sound of fabric brushing softly echoed faintly as he searched. Then his hand emerged holding a small folded envelope. Worn at the corners, the paper softened by time and handling. He paused for a moment, as if weighing something unseen, then carefully opened it, revealing another bill, slightly creased but intact, and he placed it gently beside the others, aligning it with the same quiet precision. The faint rustle of paper seemed to ripple through the air, and Daniel's eyes flicked down quickly before he masked the reaction with a small shrug, though his fingers stopped tapping the counter. A woman near the produce section leaned forward slightly, her expression now thoughtful rather than amused, and the young mother Marcus had helped earlier rested her hand on the stroller handle, watching without blinking. Daniel cleared his throat softly, attempting to recover the casual tone he had held earlier, but his voice sounded tighter as he spoke, still short. He said, though he did not lean as comfortably as before, and he shifted his weight again, glancing briefly toward the growing number of customers who had gathered within earshot. Marcus nodded slightly, not in agreement but in acknowledgement. Then he checked his pockets again, this time patting the inside lining of his coat, the faint tapping sound of his fingers against fabric creating a quiet rhythm that seemed to draw everyone deeper into the moment. He found another small bundle of coins wrapped loosely in tissue paper, and as he unwrapped them carefully, the metallic glint caught the overhead lights, and the soft clinking sound as he placed them on the counter seemed louder than before, each coin adding weight not just to the stack, but to the atmosphere surrounding them. Daniel watched closely now, his expression no longer openly amused, while Emily Carter's brows knit slightly, her attention fixed on Marcus's careful movements. Outside, the sky dimmed further as clouds thickened, and the store lights reflected more sharply against the windows, creating a soft glow that framed the quiet scene. Marcus aligned the new coins slowly, his hands steady, and when he finished, he stepped back half an inch, giving the stack space, as if presenting something measured rather than rushed. The customers around them remained still, carts paused, conversations forgotten, and the earlier laughter had completely disappeared, replaced by a quiet tension that settled over the store like a held breath, while Daniel looked down at the growing amount, then back at Marcus, and for the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face before he quickly straightened again, trying to maintain control of a moment that no longer felt entirely his. Daniel Whitmore leaned forward slightly, his eyes scanning the growing stack of coins and bills, and the faint crease forming between his brows was subtle but unmistakable. While the customers around them remained unusually still, their attention locked onto the counter where Marcus Reed stood quietly, his hands now resting at his sides, his shoulders relaxed, as though the tension in the room belonged to everyone else but him. The overhead lights reflected softly off the polished surface, and the uneven pile of money cast faint shadows that shifted as people leaned in. To look more closely, Daniel cleared his throat again, this time louder, as if trying to reclaim the rhythm of the room, and he let out a short laugh that sounded more forced than before. "You are getting closer," he said, though the humor in his voice no longer carried the same ease, and a few customers exchanged glances, their earlier amusement replaced by quiet curiosity. Marcus did not respond immediately, instead reaching slowly into the inside pocket of his coat once more, his fingers moving carefully, searching, and the room seemed to tighten again. The soft hum of refrigeration units and distant footsteps fading into the background as he pulled out a small leather wallet, worn and faded, its edges softened by years of use. He opened it gently, revealing a single folded bill tucked carefully into the corner, and for a brief moment, he paused, his thumb resting against the paper, as though weighing the significance of the last piece. Emily Carter watched closely, her hands still hovering near the register, her eyes widening slightly as Marcus carefully unfolded the bill and placed it on the counter beside the others, aligning it with quiet precision. The soft rustle of paper sounded deliberate, and the total now sat just below the amount that had started the entire moment. Daniel's smile faded completely as he looked down, his jaw tightening for a fraction of a second before he leaned back again, crossing his arms in an attempt to regain composure. Almost, he said quietly, though his voice carried less confidence, and the customers nearby shifted slightly, their carts motionless, their expressions thoughtful. Marcus glanced down at the stack, then reached into the outer pocket of his coat, his fingers brushing against something small, and he pulled out 2 more coins, their metallic glint catching the bright store lights as he placed them gently on top, the faint clink echoing in the silence. A man near the entrance lowered his phone slightly, no longer recording for amusement, but watching with growing interest, while the young mother tightened her grip on the stroller handle, her expression softened. Marcus adjusted the final coins carefully, then stepped back slightly, giving the stack space, and the total now rested just beyond the number that had been spoken earlier. The silence deepened, heavy and still, and Daniel stared down at the money, his posture stiffening as the realization settled in, the room holding its breath as the balance of the moment shifted quietly but unmistakably, while Marcus stood calmly, his expression unchanged, his eyes steady under the bright lights, as if he had never doubted where this would lead. The coins and bills rested quietly on the counter, their uneven stack reflecting the bright overhead lights, and for several seconds no one spoke, the entire store held in a stillness that felt heavier than the earlier laughter, while Daniel Whitmore stared down at the money, his jaw tightening slightly as he recalculated the amount in his mind, his fingers resting against the edge of the counter as if anchoring himself to something steady. The soft hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder now, and the faint sound of rain beginning to tap lightly against the large front windows added a quiet rhythm to the silence. Marcus Reed stood calmly, his hands at his sides, his posture relaxed, his expression unchanged, as though the moment unfolding around him did not require explanation or celebration. Emily Carter shifted slightly behind the register, her eyes moving between Daniel and the stack of money, her brows drawn together in quiet disbelief, while the customers nearby remained motionless, carts paused, conversations forgotten. A man near the beverage cooler adjusted his grip on his shopping basket, his earlier smirk gone, replaced by a thoughtful expression, and the young mother Marcus had helped earlier gently rock the stroller without realizing it, her gaze steady on the counter. Daniel exhaled slowly, then glanced around at the gathered customers, noticing their silence, their attention, and the absence of laughter that had filled the room only minutes before. He straightened his shoulders, attempting to regain composure, but his movements felt slower now, less certain, as he looked back down at the stack, the total clearly beyond the amount he had named. The rain outside grew slightly heavier, streaking thin lines across the glass, and the automatic doors opened briefly as a customer entered, then paused upon sensing the quiet tension and slowed their steps. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, then gently nudged one coin that had rolled a fraction of an inch, aligning it with the others, the soft metallic click sounding deliberate in the stillness. Daniel watched the movement, his eyes following Marcus's hand, and for a brief moment, something changed in his expression, not embarrassment, not yet, but recognition that the moment had moved beyond his control. Emily lowered her gaze briefly, then looked up again, her posture straightening as she waited, unsure what Daniel would say next. The customers remained silent, their attention unwavering, while the store lights reflected softly across the polished floor, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows blended with the faint hum of refrigeration units, creating a quiet backdrop to a moment that no longer belonged to humor or spectacle. Marcus lifted his eyes calmly toward Daniel, not demanding, not confrontational, simply waiting, and the stillness stretched again, heavier now, as Daniel stood behind the counter, looking down at the stack of money that had quietly changed everything. Daniel Whitmore finally lifted his eyes from the stack of money, and for the first time since the moment began, he did not smile, his expression tight, measured, as if recalculating not just the amount on the counter, but the attention surrounding him. While the quiet in the store deepened, the sound of rain against the windows forming a soft, steady backdrop. He opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again, his fingers brushing the edge of the counter before he straightened his posture, attempting to regain authority, yet the hesitation had already been noticed. Marcus Reed remained still, his calm presence unchanged, his eyes steady without pressure, without triumph, simply waiting. Emily Carter shifted her stance behind the register, her shoulders drawing slightly upward as she watched Daniel, while a customer near the entrance lowered his phone completely, no longer recording, his expression thoughtful rather than entertained. Daniel cleared his throat quietly, and just as he was about to speak, the automatic doors slid open again, letting in a cool rush of damp air along with a tall man in a charcoal gray coat, the fabric darkened slightly by rain, his polished shoes leaving faint wet marks on the tile as he stepped inside. The man paused just inside the entrance, scanning the store with a calm, observant gaze, his posture confident but understated, and as his eyes moved across the room, they landed on Marcus. He stopped walking immediately, his expression shifting in a way that did not match the casual atmosphere of a retail store. For a brief second, the man seemed almost surprised, then certain, and he began walking forward, his pace steady, his attention fixed on Marcus Reed. Customers near the aisle stepped aside instinctively, sensing something subtle but significant in the man's demeanor, and the quiet in the store deepened even further as he approached the counter. Daniel glanced toward the movement, his brows knitting slightly, while Emily followed the man with her eyes, her posture straightening as he came closer. The man stopped beside Marcus, his gaze steady. Then he gave a small, respectful nod, the gesture quiet but unmistakable. Marcus turned slightly, recognizing him, and for the first time since the scene began, a faint softness appeared in Marcus's expression, not surprise, but familiarity. The man spoke calmly, his voice low but clear enough to carry in the stillness. "Mr. Reed, we have been looking for you." The words settled over the store like a sudden shift in temperature, and Daniel's posture stiffened behind the counter, his eyes moving quickly between the man and Marcus, while several customers exchanged confused glances. Marcus inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the greeting, and the man continued, his tone respectful, almost formal, as if addressing someone of quiet importance. "I did not expect to find you here," he said gently, and the customers nearby leaned subtly closer, the tension thickening as the balance of the moment shifted once again, no longer centered on coins and bills, but on something far more unexpected unfolding before them. The man in the charcoal gray coat stood beside Marcus Reed with quiet composure, the faint scent of rain following him as droplets from his coat slowly darkened the polished tile beneath his shoes, and the stillness in the store deepened as customers leaned subtly closer, trying to understand the shift unfolding before them. Daniel Whitmore watched carefully from behind the counter, his posture stiff, his earlier confidence now replaced with cautious attention, while Emily Carter's eyes moved between Marcus and the newcomer, her hands resting motionless beside the register. The man extended his hand gently toward Marcus, not in a hurried gesture, but with quiet respect, and Marcus accepted it with a calm nod, their handshake brief but meaningful, like something shared beyond the moment. "I apologize for the delay," the man said softly, his voice steady, "and I should have reached you sooner." Marcus gave a small, thoughtful nod, his expression composed, and the man turned slightly toward the counter, his gaze settling briefly on the stack of coins and bills. His eyes softened for a moment. Then he looked back at Marcus with quiet understanding. "We finalized everything this morning," he continued, his tone calm but clear enough for the nearby customers to hear, "and the board approved your proposal exactly as you designed it." Daniel's brows drew together slightly, confusion flickering across his face as he glanced again at Marcus, then back at the man in the gray coat. Emily's eyes widened subtly, and the customers nearest the counter shifted, sensing that the moment had moved beyond something simple. The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sleek leather folder, the material dark and polished, and he opened it carefully, revealing a document clipped neatly inside. Marcus glanced at it briefly, then nodded once, his calm demeanor unchanged, while the man continued speaking with quiet respect. "The investors are already waiting," he said, "and the first location is scheduled to open next month." Several customers exchanged surprised glances, their earlier assumptions dissolving into quiet curiosity, while Daniel's posture tightened further, his eyes flicking between the document and Marcus. The man closed the folder gently, then added, "We also prepared the transfer you requested, and it has already been completed." Marcus inclined his head slightly again, acknowledging the update, and the man offered a faint, respectful smile before stepping back half a step, giving Marcus space. The rain outside continued tapping softly against the windows, and the store lights reflected across the glass, framing the stillness inside. Daniel shifted behind the counter, his hands resting on the surface as he looked at Marcus with growing uncertainty, while the customers remained silent, their attention fixed on the quiet exchange. Marcus glanced down briefly at the stack of coins and bills, then back at the man beside him. And the moment felt heavier now, not because of the money on the counter, but because of the quiet realization spreading across the room that the man they had laughed at moments earlier carried a presence none of them had expected. The quiet inside the store settled deeper as Marcus Reed looked down at the stack of coins and bills one last time, then gently slid them forward across the polished counter, the soft metallic sound echoing faintly beneath the hum of the fluorescent lights. And Daniel Whitmore instinctively followed the movement with his eyes, his posture stiff, his hands resting on the counter as though he no longer knew where to place them. Marcus spoke calmly, his voice steady and quiet, not confrontational, not proud, simply measured. "You made an offer," he said, "and I believe I have met it." The words were not loud, yet they carried clearly through the stillness, and several customers shifted slightly, their attention tightening once more. Daniel opened his mouth, then hesitated, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty, while Emily Carter lowered her gaze briefly, then looked back up, her expression thoughtful. The man in the charcoal gray coat stood quietly beside Marcus, his presence steady, offering no interruption, as though allowing the moment to resolve itself. Outside, the rain softened, leaving thin trails across the windows as muted daylight filtered through the glass, casting a gentle reflection across the floor. Daniel glanced down again at the money, then back at Marcus, and the realization settled visibly across his face, the weight of the earlier words now impossible to dismiss. The customers around them remained silent, their carts still, their expressions subdued, the earlier laughter completely gone. Marcus stepped back slightly from the counter, his posture relaxed, and after a brief pause, he reached forward and gently gathered the coins and bills back into his hands. Not hurried, not dramatic, simply careful, as though the moment itself had already served its purpose. Daniel watched the movement, his shoulders lowering slightly, his gaze thoughtful rather than defensive. Marcus placed the money back into his worn wallet, then into his coat pocket, and he gave a small nod toward Daniel, not in victory, but in quiet acknowledgement. The man in the gray coat stepped closer and opened the door, the cool air drifting inside as the rain faded into a soft mist. Marcus walked toward the entrance with calm, measured steps, and as he passed the young mother, she offered a small, respectful nod, which he returned gently. The customers parted slightly, creating space without being asked, their attention following him as he approached the door. Daniel remained behind the counter, watching silently, his expression subdued, while Emily Carter rested her hands lightly on the register, her eyes thoughtful. Marcus stepped outside into the quiet afternoon, the damp pavement reflecting soft light from the cloudy sky, and the man in the gray coat followed beside him. The automatic doors closed slowly behind them, and inside the store, no one spoke for several seconds, the silence lingering like something meaningful left behind, while Daniel stood still behind the counter, looking toward the door, the reflection of the empty entrance visible across the polished floor, and the quiet hum of the store returned, softer now, as the moment settled into memory.